So, when it comes to consciousness, in psychology, we're referring to two different things. You have to have both in order to be considered conscious. Sorry. We're referring to your sensations and perceptions of the external environment and your self-awareness of mental events, like your own thoughts and feelings. So you have to have both an understanding of what's going on in the external world and your own internal world. Now, when it comes to sleep, sleep is an altered state of consciousness. It's different from what we call your waking consciousness, your normal, clear level of awareness. So an altered state is just any kind of deviation from that waking consciousness. And sleep is something that we experience quite frequently. People sleep for approximately 30 to 40% of their lives. So it seems a bit, interesting that people spend so much time just kind of laying there doing nothing. Like, a lot of researchers have looked into sleep and just asked a very good question. Why is it that people spend so much time doing absolutely nothing? Like, obviously we need it. Obviously we get something out of it. Because if you try to, skip sleep, if you try to stay awake for a very long time, it's eventually going to catch up to you. So you can put it off, but you can't completely ignore it. But when it comes to what do we actually get out of, sleeping, there's two major theories. You have the restorative theories. These are the theories that argue that we lower our body and our brain activity and our metabolism during sleep to help us conserve our energy and lengthen our lives. So, in other words, because we sleep, we're able to live longer and be healthier. And then there are the circadian theories. You could also call these the evolutionary theories or the adaptive theories. But the whole idea here is we sleep because that is a behavior pattern that has evolved. In the sense that, if you as being a human, if you were to wander around in the dark night, you would probably get into trouble. Humans do not have very good night vision, so it's not good for us. It's not a good idea for us to go wandering around in the dark. So sleep evolved because, our ancient ancestors who did go wander around in the dark despite, poor night vision, those are the ones that were basically killed off, eaten by wolves or whatever. So you are the descendant of people who had the good sense to just stay in the camp in the safety of, your little group. But everybody needs to get a certain amount of sleep. Most people, most adults I should say, need about 5 to 8 hours of sleep a night. If you don't get at least 5 hours a night, then you're going to be, really hurting the next day. But people are a little bit different, But the one thing I would say about that is, it doesn't matter how different you are. It doesn't matter how little sleep you think you need. You need to get at least 5. 5 is, I would say, a minimum amount of sleep that a person should get in a day. But also, if you like to sleep a lot, I just want to warn you, it can be bad for you. You really shouldn't sleep longer than about 9 hours a day. Once you get past about 9 hours a day, that's when you're really not getting anything out of it, and it can actually be counterproductive. After about 8 hours, your body is at that point fully rested, and any amount of time that you spend in bed after that, you're really just wasting time. You're not really getting anything out of it. But obviously, it doesn't matter what theories you ascribe to, obviously sleep is a very important thing. If you don't get enough, you're going to start having cognitive problems. You're going to have difficulty thinking straight. You're going to have difficulty remembering things. And if you are deprived of sleep enough, you could actually become psychotic. So that just means you're having hallucinations and delusions, and you're probably a very paranoid, like irritable person. Now, when we compare humans to other animals, what we see is that humans sleep, relatively not that much. So all mammals and birds have to sleep. But humans, on average, sleep about as much as a rabbit and a guinea pig. Some animals that sleep longer than humans would be, for example, giant sloth. Sloth sleeps for about 20 hours a day. Or an owl monkey, that's 17 hours a day. But there are some animals that are pretty similar to ourselves that don't really sleep much at all, like horses. Horses only sleep 2 hours a day. But the point I'm trying to make here is, even though we see these differences, sleep is definitely an important part of all these animals' lives. Now, when it comes to doing sleep research, we have three basic kinds of technology that we tend to use. We tend to use electroencephalography, EEG, to measure brainwave activity. We also use electrooculography, or EOG, to measure eye movements, and electromyography to measure muscle movements. But the one that I'm going to talk to you about the most would be EEG, because EEG, when you study the brain waves of a person who's sleeping, you can tell what kind of sleep they're getting and for how long are they getting that much sleep. So there's different qualities of sleep. The lightest sleep that you're going to experience is going to be, that kind of sleep when you first start to fall asleep. It's like you're still kind of half awake, sort of. That's when you're going to see what are called beta waves. These are these small and fast waves. And as you transition into a deeper sleep, then you'll start to see slower and, larger waves that we call alpha waves. And then the third stage of sleep would be the theta wave stage. And then the fourth stage would be entirely delta waves. So those are the largest and the slowest brain waves. So when you get to delta wave sleep, you're going to be in your deepest kind of sleep. So those are the four stages, and you can tell which stage the person is just by looking at those brain waves. We would call these four stages the non-REM stages, because during these first four stages, the person is not experiencing any rapid eye movements. Like if you were looking at your electrooculography machine, you wouldn't really see much movement at all. And the interesting thing about these non-REM sleep stages is that they're relatively dream-free. So the person, if you were to wake a person up during non-REM sleep, if they report any dream to you, it's going to be a very vague and undetailed kind of a dream. And you get most of your non-REM sleep early on in the night, like in the first 4 hours or so. That's when you're going to get the majority of non-REM sleep. But it's a cycle. You go from stage 1 to 4 within the first hour of sleep, and then you'll shoot back up to what we call REM sleep. And REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep, is what we associate with dreaming. So when your eyes are twitching while you're asleep, that just means you're having a dream, basically. And as I just mentioned, you have your first instance of REM sleep after about an hour of laying in bed. And then you'll have more instances of REM as the night goes on. So REM sleep is associated with dreaming. About 80% of the time, if you wake a person up during REM sleep, they'll be able to report a very vivid and detailed dream to you. And what we tend to see is that if you are talking to a person, or if the person is smelling something or hearing something while they're in REM sleep, those sensory perceptions will actually sometimes be incorporated into the dream. So you could influence a person's dream by exposing them to different stimuli while they're asleep, as long as they're in that REM sleep. And dreams can run in real time, and everybody, even if you don't remember your dreams, everybody dreams. Everybody has at least 4 or 5 separate periods of REM sleep a night. So you could say about 4 or 5 separate dreams per night. It's just the reason why you tend to not remember them is because when you wake up in the morning, you do not wake up during a REM stage. But if you want to remember your dreams, just have somebody wake you up while you're, doing those little rapid eye movements. And one other thing I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail is a lot of people think sleep time behavior, like walking and talking, is associated with having a dream. It's like the person's dreaming about walking, so they get up out of bed and they walk away. That's actually not the case. So sleepwalking and talking is not really related to dreaming at all. But depending on whose theories you prefer, you'll have different opinions as to what the point of dreams is. Like, what do we get out of dreams? What do dreams mean? Well, one of the first psychologists to talk a lot about dreaming was Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud argued that dreams are the expressions of our repressed thoughts. So it's like our unconscious mind coming to the surface and telling us, what we want in life, what we're afraid of, and things like that. So if you focus on the content of your dreams, you can learn more about yourself, your own unconscious forces that are affecting your life. And that's what dream interpretation is all about. That's a technique used by psychoanalysts. But if you remember what I said about Freud in the previous videos, he was no scientist. So this theory, that dreams can be interpreted to figure out your unconscious forces, nobody really takes that very seriously in the scientific community. The theory that we tend to focus on is called the activation synthesis theory. And the whole idea here is that your dreams don't really have much meaning. Your dreams are just kind of a random activity in lower brain centers that your higher brain areas, the more creative brain areas, then kind of piece together to create a story. So it's kind of like Mad Libs, if you want to think of it that way. It's just like you get all this random information and you're trying to connect the dots. So your brain is actively trying to make sense of this random activity. And if you don't get enough REM sleep, if you don't have enough dreaming, you're going to experience a couple of things. First of all, you're going to have difficulty just remembering new information. So REM sleep seems to be important when it comes to memory. Another thing is you're going to see that you'll get extra REM sleep in the next night. So the next time you go to sleep, you're going to have more REM than you would normally. So, like I mentioned, REM sleep is definitely an important thing for memory. Like if you take certain kinds of sleeping pills or other medications that prevent you from having REM sleep, you're going to have pretty severe memory problems the next day. Now, your body regulates how tired you should be based on something called your circadian rhythm. So your circadian rhythm refers to this kind of regular fluctuation from high points to low points in pretty much all of your body functioning, like your digestion, your breathing, and all that stuff. And the way that our circadian rhythm works is it actually is responding to the environment. So the environment, like cues in the environment, stimuli in the environment, are just setting this kind of internal clock, if you want to think of it that way. So these external cues, we call them Zeitgebers, just time givers, basically. So here's just a couple of examples. You will feel sleepier if it's dark. Like if you are in a dark room or if it's dark outside, you're just naturally going to feel more sleepy. Another one is temperature. When it starts to get cooler, typically at night it gets a little bit cooler. So when it starts to get a little bit cooler, then we get a little more sleepy. Like, of course, if you're freezing, you're not going to be able to sleep, but like a cool temperature is going to flip a switch in your brain, basically, that tells you it's nighttime and we should go to bed. Now, if you don't have access to these kinds of Zeitgebers, like imagine you're in a room with no windows and the temperature is constant. So you have no idea of telling what time of the day it is. Like there isn't any clocks anywhere. What you're going to see is that people, their pattern of sleep and wake will actually shift over time. Like, in other words, our internal clock, just naturally, without these Zeitgeibers, our internal clock doesn't fit our 24-hour, clock. So it's actually more so the case that our internal clock has got a 25-hour cycle. So the first night, you'll stay up, an hour later than you did the previous night. The next night, you'll stay up an hour later than before. So it's just like you're slowly shifting the amount of time that you are awake and asleep. So every night you're just going to go to bed 1 hour later, basically, is what I'm saying. But most of the time, this isn't a problem because we do have easy access to Zeitgeibers. Like, you can just open your window or go outside. That internal clock I mentioned, there's actually a biological mechanism. There's a part of your brain that moderates that circadian rhythm. So your suprachiasmatic nucleus could be considered your biological clock. There's evidence of other kinds of clocks, but that definitely seems like a very important one. So the suprachiasmatic nucleus is what will signal your pineal gland to either secrete or suppress melatonin. And if you remember what I said in a previous video, melatonin is the hormone that will make you either more or less tired. Now, if you are having sleeping problems, there are some options for you. Like, for example, you might want to take a sleeping pill, like Valium or Librium. These can be very helpful, but like all drugs, sleeping pills have side effects, and they can also result in addiction. Like, for example, with a lot of sleeping pills, they will allow you to get some sleep, but some of those sleeping pills don't allow you to have REM sleep. So they'll actually prevent you from having that REM sleep, which you need for your brain to kind of refresh itself. So melatonin is the hormone that allows you to either feel more or less tired, and your brain actually synthesizes melatonin from a commonly occurring neurotransmitter, serotonin, within your pineal gland. So it's this melatonin that's released that will either trigger, feeling more tired or feeling less tired. And I just want to say once again that this melatonin is definitely the chemical of sleep, if you want to think of it that way, but you can't simply take a melatonin supplement to help with sleep disorders. Like simply eating stuff that has melatonin in it, like eating a melatonin supplement pill or something like that, that's really not going to do anything. We've never found any scientific evidence that taking melatonin supplements can help with any sleep problem. So if you are buying these kind of melatonin supplements, don't. It's a waste of your money, basically. Now I want to just talk about a few different kinds of sleep phenomenon, like lucid dreaming, for example. A lucid dream is when a person feels as though they are awake and in control, even though they know they're asleep. So it's like the person feels like they're in control of the dream and can make important decisions on how that dream goes. So anybody can experience a lucid dream. What you would basically do in order to experience a lucid dream is called imagery rehearsal, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. There are many different kinds of sleep problems people have, sleep disorders. Now these are definitely considered disorders. They are in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is something published by the American Psychiatric Association. So one of the most common ones would be insomnia, which is a problem of sleep initiation and maintenance. In other words, you have difficulty getting to sleep, you wake up frequently during the night, or you just wake up way too early and you can't get back to bed. Now, fortunately, for most people, insomnia is just a temporary situation. It's like because of high anxiety, because of high stress, or some other reason, you just have difficulty getting some sleep. Like children traditionally get some pretty bad insomnia on Christmas Eve, for example. But for some very unfortunate people, they have chronic insomnia. So that just means like months of sleeplessness. If that sounds horrible, it is. People with chronic insomnia are pretty miserable, and they have a lot of, serious cognitive and physical problems. But I just want to remind you that sleeping pills can be helpful for people with, a disorder like this, but sleeping pills could actually make the problem worse as well. Like if you need to take a sleeping pill just to fall asleep, you're basically addicted at that point. And if you don't get your pill, you're not going to get any sleep at all. So sleeping pill, withdrawal is a very serious issue. A much more deadly kind of sleep disorder would be sleep apnea. So that's when a person has problems breathing during the night. This will result in them, seemingly suffocate while they're trying to sleep. Like if you're sleeping next to somebody with sleep apnea, they might get very quiet all of a sudden and then start gasping for air like they're choking to death, because they kind of literally are. So there's two kinds. You have obstructive, sleep apnea, where the person's respiratory passages are being blocked. So the person literally doesn't have, a way to get that air into their body. But the other one is more so having to do with just malfunctioning of the brain. Like there's some kind of brain problem, some kind of brain damage perhaps, that's causing the person to have trouble breathing during sleep. And there's a few different ways you can treat this. We know that being overweight is related, so weight loss can help. You can undergo surgery to physically alter the breathing tubes, or you could use what's called a continuous positive airway pressure mask, a CPAP mask, which you just put over your face while you're asleep, and it forces air in and out of your lungs. But that's kind of an extreme solution. Another disorder would be narcolepsy. This is like a kind of hypersomnia. So here the person is just sleeping too much, or they'll sleep multiple times during the day without wanting to. So this is like a severe daytime sleepiness and a repeated occurrence of what we call like sleep attacks. So here the person will just kind of be going about their daily life and then they're asleep, like instantly. And the interesting thing about it is people who have narcolepsy, they instantly will fall into REM sleep. So they're just doing their daily life and suddenly they're dreaming. Now, if you've ever seen narcolepsy depicted in a movie or a cartoon or something, it can be kind of funny. It's like, this person just falls asleep into their food or whatever. But in reality, narcolepsy is a very scary thing. Like, imagine you are a person with narcolepsy and you simply need to walk down the sidewalk. Well, you would be afraid that if you fall asleep while walking, you're going to hit your head, you could potentially die. So narcolepsy could potentially be deadly. It really is disabling in that sense. I mentioned earlier in this video that sleepwalking and sleep talking is not really related to dreaming. In reality, you could do all different kinds of sleep behaviors, and none of them are really related to dreaming. So when you're asleep, you could walk, you could talk, you could cook, you could clean, you could fight, you could, even do some basic kinds of work. I've even heard examples of people having sex while they're asleep. So pretty much anything you can do while you're awake, you can do while you're asleep. And because you're not having a dream that's related to it, if you were to wake a person up while they're doing this kind of stuff, it'll be very anxiety producing for them, because they won't know what's going on. They won't know why they're in, a different room washing the dishes, for example. And they could have a pretty severe anxiety attack because of it. So my basic word of advice is, if you think somebody is doing this kind of sleep behavior, just try your best to get them to go back to bed. Now, if you have nightmares, I don't really have much to say about that. It's just a scary dream, basically. It's not really a disorder. But if you have night terrors, that's different. A night terror is when a person starts having like a panic attack while they're asleep. It's like the person will be screaming and shouting and flailing their arms around even though they're asleep. But the thing about night terrors is they're actually completely different from nightmares. A night terror is more similar to the other kinds of sleep behavior I was just talking about. In other words, the person who's having a night terror is not necessarily dreaming about something scary. So if you were to wake somebody up when they're having a night terror, they would be extremely anxious. Like when they wake up, they'll realize that they're really agitated, their heart's racing, but they won't know why. So it can be very scary. So just like my advice for other kinds of sleep behaviors, the best thing you can do for somebody with night terrors is just try to get them to stay in bed. Now, I mentioned earlier that imagery rehearsal is a technique you can use for, experiencing a lucid dream. In fact, imagery rehearsal is something you can use to experience any kind of dream you want. So if you want to dream about something specific, then here's basically how you would do it. As you get into bed and as you start to fall asleep, you just repeatedly imagine this dream you want to have over and over and over to yourself. And you try to, as vividly as you can, picture what that dream is going to be. So exactly what you're going to do and where you're going to go. In the case of lucid dreaming, just imagine yourself to be in control of that dream. And you're much more likely to have that kind of a dream due to, rehearsing it, basically. Now, something that might be related to sleep apnea would be sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. This is when a young child, and the younger the child is, the more likely. But this is when a very young child goes to bed and is perfectly healthy, but then just simply dies during the night. So it could be that when I say child, I really mean like infant. Like we're talking 1 year or less. It's like this infant, perhaps just maybe their lungs, maybe their breathing tubes just haven't developed enough, and they just can't, continue that behavior while they're asleep. Or maybe they have an underdeveloped gag reflex or something like that. So the only real word of advice, because this is a pretty scary sleep disorder, especially if you're a new parent, the only word of advice I have for you is just the current research suggests that the child should sleep on his back. So if you put the child to sleep on his back, then there seems to be less of a chance that this SIDS will occur.